Murdoch said, I want to do a deal. What numbers are going to take? This number came about of $12, which is roughly $700 million to the shareholders. The board voted on it and said, okay, and they crammed through due diligence literally in about a 3.5-day period. Gerard Clara Madison is a small boutique investment bank, and the head and the founder, Manny Gerard, saw our business plan and said, I'm in, I'll put in $250,000 of my own money. The bank then said, if Manny's going to do it, then we'll put in $250,000, and we raised $7.2 million over the next 45 days. I moved to New Haven, Connecticut to basically help manage and grow the business out there. That for me was very tough. We still weren't really making any money. I was just massively out of any support group and had no friends, and I was just saying to myself, I know it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get a chance to grow an internet business, but is it really worth being out here by myself and being kind of lonely, frankly? My parents were great and are still great and were super supportive, and for the most part they would just say, you can do it, or if you feel like you can't do it and you need to go another direction and go get a regular job, then they're supportive in that too. Certainly everyone says it, but the things that matter are family and your very close friends, and you really can't do too wrong if you just surround yourself with them and invest time in them and are honest with them. I think it's a pretty good formula for a happy, successful life.
Greater Good Radio. Connect, learn, heal, and grow. This Greater Good archive video is brought to you by Brain Gain Hawaii, a boutique executive recruiting, career development, and coaching firm. Learn more at braingainhi.com.
Welcome to our show, Brett.
Thank you.
So Brett, you're the co-founder of MySpace, as everyone knows it, Intermix Media. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. We started the original company, Intermix Media, in the summer of 1998. And the company morphed, as lots of companies do through the years, but we really started out initially as a entertainment media company that primarily was doing e-commerce. So we were primarily selling movies and music and games on the internet. And I know that doesn't sound revolutionary, but in 1998 or 1999, that was relatively cutting edge. And we launched the business under that brand and under that concept. We quickly realized after a year or two in that space, with the arrival of CD Now and Amazon and all the big e-commerce players, that we really couldn't compete with those big guys and make a big business out of it. The competition was just too tough and the margins in that business were too thin. So consequently, we started looking at other areas of the internet where we thought we could not only compete, but hopefully succeed and be a leader. And really the first area that we went into was the concept of viral content and user-generated content. And this was 2001, long before MySpace ever existed, but we started to generate greeting card sites, short animation sites, casual game sites, where the users were really interactive with the content and they would rank the game, or when I was done playing a game, it would say, who do you want to challenge? And I'd say, I want to challenge Evan. And Evan would get an email that says, Brett just got 800 at this game, Gold Miner. He doesn't think you can beat him. And then Evan would play that game, and it grew sort of that way. And the company, fortunately, got a lot of lift from that, because just about 2001, 2002, the advertising market started to come back on the internet. And consequently, we were able to grow that side of the business. We sold the e-commerce business off and focused only on growing content sites online, all the way up through the summer of 2003 when we launched a site called MySpace.
How many did you have at the time? How many sites?
We probably had about 50 sites at that time, and probably over the years had launched more like 150, which I always tell people is a good example of, in the best case scenario world, you have one idea and you do it and it works. But more likely in reality in business, you have 5 ideas, you're trying them, 4 of them don't work. You start doing the one that works, and then you think of other iterations of that idea and try to build those out. And really that's what we did all through that era, is trying to figure out, the internet is still obviously in its infancy, but especially back then was really the business model behind internet businesses were really in their infancy, and companies were obviously struggling with how to do it. That's the biggest reason why there was 80% of the internet companies went out of business through that window. Is not that everyone running internet companies is not smart, obviously, it's that the economic environment was changing very quickly, and it was pretty hard to figure out a model that basically brought in more money than it cost to run the business.
So was MySpace a surprise for you guys, or was there some kind of secret sauce formula to come up with what websites were going to be launched?
It wasn't a surprise from the sense of that it got any sort of traction out of the gate. We had launched a bunch of sites and we put a lot of resources behind it. Chris DeWolf and Tom Anderson, who are on the cover of Fortune, and they're actually still with Fox today. They were the guys that had the initial idea and launched the site. And really, Tom Anderson was the brains behind the product of MySpace and which verticals to roll out next. So when we rolled out that site, they were extremely excited about the launch. And really, as a company, we were excited about the launch. The nice thing is, because we had so much experience launching various internet sites, it didn't take months and months and months to figure out that there was a formula there that was working, right? So internet companies, content-based companies, pretty much are like television stations or newspapers in that they look at the number of people coming to their site, how many page views or how much time the people are spending on that site, and how often they're coming back to their site. So a typical internet content company like an iVillage or a CNN.com or Fox News is seeing a person once or twice a week, typically anywhere between 8 and 10 minutes. And I'm sure you see that in your regular internet lives. You go to a site and then you look at it for a bit. Even from the first and second month at MySpace, we were seeing people come back to the site every day and spending more like 15, 18, 20 minutes on the site. So really right out of the gate, we said, wow, this is fascinating. People are really fascinated with returning to the site and seeing if people have commented on the picture they just put up, or seeing if someone's responded to a comment they had left on someone else's picture, or whatever the case may be. But it was a really interactive site. And of course, the reason page views are so important is, to the publisher, page views are money. The more page views you have, basically you can put an ad on every page and you make more and more money. So even though the site initially was very tiny, obviously, and it was really launched from an internal office promotion where we just said we had about 200 employees at the time, that everyone come onto MySpace, invite as many friends as you can. The employee with the most friends in their network at the end of the month will win $200, second place $100, third place $50. And I think the winner had something like 88 or 90 friends in their network. And that just gave it a little bit of a poof, and started out with, next thing you know, we were at 2,000 users, 3,000 users, 4,000 users. But even though that was so early on, you could really see the metrics were there, that there was a formula that was going to work.
So MySpace is not the first, or was it the first in that space? That
No,
kind of
so
social networking
the first
space?
site in that space that to make a lot of headway was called Friendster.
Right.
That company, the timing worked out well in that Friendster was mostly focused on me going in and seeing Evan's contacts and saying, Evan, will you connect me? I see that you know Joe Smith, who's connected with the ABC Corp. Will you connect me with him? Mm-hmm. Right? And it worked very well from that perspective. It was really the first of its kind. The difference in that model is, of course, I don't need to go back to and check your contacts on a daily basis, mm-hmm. right? It's more of a thing I do once a month or once every couple weeks at the most. MySpace, of course, is more about people's lives and about everything that's going on in their lives, and not only sharing that, but connecting with people all over the globe to share that. So consequently, users go back once or twice or 3 times a day.
So you guys were not the first mover in that area. What do you think was the most important things, or maybe the milestones that took you to the top of that market?
That's a great question. So sometimes, in launching as many internet businesses as we have over the years, it's nice sometimes to be first, but in most ways on the internet, it's actually fine to be second or third or fourth, because you have the advantage of obviously seeing what's working, seeing what's not working. And in the internet space, of course, because everyone, it's not like the offline world where if you get that best real estate spot on a specific corner, you've got an advantage for the next 50 years, right? In the internet, MySpace could be big tomorrow, and theoretically 5 years from now, another site could be big, because everyone has access to all sites. So consequently, being second or third is okay. And we really looked at it exactly like that. We saw that there was initial traction, there was clearly interest in this concept of social networking. But for the most part, the thing that users didn't like about Friendster was what I touched on earlier, which is I could only ask you to connect me with someone in your database, or I could only ask you to connect me with someone in your database. There's no way to actually search the entire database. That's why we launched it with Tom Anderson being everybody's friend, because the key was that made one friend be shared between today 150, 160 million people. And the key, of course, then is that allows everyone to be searchable, and that allows me to find 7 people in Australia that are also interested in Metallica or whatever the case may be, as opposed to the Friendster model where you could only search in a very defined database.
How many people did you have on your MySpace team at that time?
About 23 or 24.
And how soon did you folks have to bring on more staff because of the explosive growth?
Like the third or fourth week. The third or fourth week. I mean, we had gotten pretty good at seeing what was working and funneling into that growth. And clearly MySpace worked better than anything else we had ever launched before or since. So as soon as we saw those metrics, as soon as we saw how often people were coming to the site, how long they were spending on the site, you knew you had a formula there. And consequently, we just had to fill it both people-wise and also servers and having the technology infrastructure to support that growth.
What was your life? What were you feeling emotionally, physically, mentally, knowing that everyone's all of a sudden coming to your site? They're excited about it, you're excited about it, and you don't really know the path it's going to take. And then eventually, it led to huge success.
Right. So that time, honestly, to put it in perspective, we were a public company. Intermix Media, the parent of MySpace. We had been public for 5 years at that time, 4 years at that time, and we were doing roughly $80 million a year in revenue. That was the size of the business. So we launched MySpace. It's working very well at month 2, at month 3, at month 4, but revenue-wise, it's very small, and compared to everything else that's going on, we clearly had to keep focus on the other parts of the business that were actually generating the operating income. So initially, it was excitement over the product, excitement over the fact that I thought if we executed correctly, we could have a huge success on our hands. But it was also staying focused on our core business and keeping all the engines going.
Okay, so Intermix was already public. You founded the company with your partners?
Yes.
When did Intermix go public?
April 14th, 1999.
You started in 98?
98, yeah. So it was a different era. It was the era of speed back then.
So let's talk about that. How did you meet your partners? How did you guys get this thing formed? And what was it like to take something IPO in a year?
Yeah, so it was a different era. Obviously, it was the early 90s or the late 90s. And the whole concept of internet and internet businesses getting off the ground was there was tons of money chasing everything under the sun. I went to UCLA, graduated in 1996 with the guy I started with. He was my roommate after college. We saw a bunch of companies getting off the ground and getting funding very quickly. One of them being a company called theglobe.com, which if you go back and look in 1998, it was the best performing IPO there was. Opened at like 10 and closed that day at like 34. And essentially it was a entertainment content company online that was a little gaming oriented around games, but it was 2 young guys in their 20s that were based on the East Coast. And I remember literally seeing those, reading about it and saying, what? These guys are launching this entertainment internet content company and they're in New York, we're here in LA, like we can make that work. We can get some traction behind that. So initially we sort of self-funded and then went out on the road to raise money behind this idea of an LA-based entertainment internet company. It took about 10 months to raise the initial funding, and it was very typical of the fundraising process where there were no's from probably 100 different groups, and those no's lasted maybe like 8 or 10 months. And almost to the point where we questioned many times the actual direction we were going. Initially, we were going more after angel financing and the Southern California group of angels and individuals, calling on individuals. That didn't have a lot of traction, so we switched more to venture capital. We just weren't developed enough business, or certainly didn't have the background, so that didn't really work either. Long story short, a group in New York called Gerard Clara Madison is a small boutique investment bank, and the head and the founder of that investment bank is named Manny Gerard. And when he saw our business plan and kind of liked the fact that we were these young guys that weren't really going about it the traditional way and just wanted to give it a shot and try and make it work, he said, you know what, guys, I'm in, I'll support that. I'll put in $250,000 of my own money. Gerard Clara Madison, the bank, then said, well, if Manny's going to do it, then we'll put in $250,000. And from that moment, everything else just fell in line. He has a lot of personal credibility, so consequently we were able to then go back to the other people we've been talking about, and we raised $7.2 million over the next 45 days.
Did you have experience in business before that?
Not much, not much. Just trying to start little businesses. I was doing a lot of real estate, actually, in like 96 and 97.
You mean you were doing it in college?
Graduated in 96, so this was just out of college.
So what was your major in college?
Business economics. But my one thing about college, and I say this all the time when I speak at colleges, is I think college is great. I'm a huge fan of college in general, but as far as business experience and really learning, I think there's nothing compares to starting a business or joining people that are starting a business, or big business, small business, it doesn't matter. The amount you learn in a month actually doing it, I think, is more than you learn in 4 or 5 years in college. I'd love to say UCLA, you know, there was some great things other than contacts and stuff certainly came out of that, but for the most part, it was figuring it out our own and getting, you know, that breakthrough support from some key guys.
What was the worst no that you got during those no's? And how many no's do you think you got?
Well, the worst part is you get no's without ever even getting a no. You know, that's the funny part, is just trying to call people, and eventually the best thing you get is their assistant emailing you back saying, don't call this person anymore. And that happened a lot. There were plenty of times where the person seemed interested and we'd go make a presentation and then they just don't call you back, that kind of thing.
Was there ever one where they said, oh, this sucks, and that was about it?
Yeah, people are usually a little more nice than that. They didn't necessarily say that, but believe me, they were probably thinking it.
So right out of college, you started going out to fundraise with your friends. How did you know what path to follow? Because like you said, you didn't have that business experience.
Right, it's a great question. So junior year in college, I worked as an intern for a guy who had a small investment bank that was doing private placements for public companies. And basically what he was doing is he had a pool of money, in foreign money, and they would go to these small private bulletin board companies with like 15, 20, $30 million market caps that needed capital, and they would connect them and do a deal and put in $1 million at some reduced stock price. Those investors then most of the time would look to sell that position pretty quickly and make a 30% return or a 25% return. So I worked for him for about a year and saw firsthand on one side the way the fundraising process works and got to meet some of these bodies of capital that invest in businesses. And on the other side, I got to actually meet the CEOs that were running these relatively small companies. But I was fascinated by the whole concept that a lot of these guys had started on their own and had got the stuff off the ground. So it sort of got me out of the mentality of I need to go work at a big company, I need to go work at Nestle, and I need to be there for 3 years, and then I'm going to go work at Wells Fargo, and then 20 years from now I can think about doing something outside the box. I, fortunately, as a junior in college, had exposure to 10 or 15 different people that had different levels of success, but they all achieved, in my eyes, pretty high level of success doing it on their own.
Did any one of them give you valuable advice that you use throughout your business decisions early on and you always keep in mind now?
I got lots of advice. The guy that I worked for at that investment bank, his advice, and it was more because he wanted to benefit from it, but it really has worked well. And this is another thing I say all the time, anyone that listens to me, but he really convinced me early on. Part of that business, the way it works is once you've got the capital sources, you need to proactively go out and find companies that want to raise money through that vehicle. So a lot of it is actually cold calling, essentially, the CEOs of these businesses or the CFOs and saying, hey, do you want to do a deal structured like this? It looks like you only have $2 million on your balance sheet or whatever the case may be. So the individual that I worked for said, don't ever be afraid to call anybody. You have to call these guys. At the time I was probably 20 or 21. Don't think just because you're 20 or 21 and don't know exactly what you're doing that they're going to somehow know that or feel that. You call them with confidence and you're providing something that very well may be a great fit for them. These guys need capital to fund their businesses and you have access to capital. Call them up and have that kind of belief. And before that I was much more nervous and almost felt like, would these guys even want to have a conversation with me? And over time, I sort of saw pretty quickly that once you got to the right person, usually the CEO or the CFO, and could prove essentially that you were credible, that you had done a deal or that at least the firm had done a deal, you instantly had a rapport with the person, and I was talking to another CEO like I was, running Morgan Stanley, a 50-year-old guy running Morgan Stanley. But meanwhile, I'm 20 years old in college. That whole business, by the way, just to show you how small it was, that whole business was run out of his house. It was 5 people total. We'd drive to his house in the morning. We all had our cubes with our phones, and we'd start making phone calls and trying to put together deals. But that honestly still sticks with me today. Even the size of Intermix and MySpace, even as big as it got, not so much at the end, but early on, we would want to do a partnership with another internet company. And lots of times there's just this perception. We sold the business for roughly $700 million. There's obviously lots of internet companies like Yahoo, where their market cap is $40 billion. So consequently, when you're calling on Yahoo because you want to try and put together a deal, it's easy to get intimidated and say, oh, they don't want to talk to us, or they don't have time for us, or almost just avoid going right at the person you want to get to because there's all kinds of excuses. I should go through someone else, or can someone introduce me, or whatever. But I guess my point is, even through all the way up to today, if I'm trying to get a hold of Rupert Murdoch at News Corp to try and pitch him something, the first person I'm going to call is there, and I'm going to try very hard. If for some reason I can't, then I'll go down after that. But it's not starting at a lower level and kind of working your way up, I guess.
Do you agree with the saying, fake it till you make it, then? I mean, in regards to
Definitely.
confidence?
Definitely. Huge believer in fake it till you make it in lots of arenas, especially in business, because that's half the battle. I mean, if you think about it, people, it doesn't matter if it's the guy running Merrill Lynch that's making $100 million a year, or the guy running, a 3-person internet startup. They're both business people trying to do the best for their company, and at some level it's just a person on the other end of that line. And if you can make a compelling case and make something that they understand and get across to them, and you don't have a lot of time obviously, but in 1 to 2 minutes you can do a deal with anybody in the world.
Maybe you can clarify fake it till you make it so people can understand what you're talking about.
So I would say some elements of fake it till you make it, as funny as it sounds, are things like business card, like having a good professional business card and handing it out and doing it as if maybe, and kind of having the attitude that there's 100 employees back at the home office, when in reality the home office is the downstairs in your apartment kind of thing. And even the professional, your kind of phone system and stuff like that, it sounds small, but when you're a business and you're calling out and people are going to be calling you back, if you're answering on your cell phone and it's staticky, it just doesn't convey any kind of credible business. If you've got a phone system and it says, press 1 for Brett Brewer and press 2 or 3 for these other options, and all of a sudden the person calling in is thinking, hey, this is a pretty credible business. Now, it might still be the same 3 people working out of your garage, but it does make a big difference.
In regards to the fake it till you make it, in regards to age, you're still a young guy. Do you still get intimidated, if somebody is older than you? And then also, how do you feel when a younger person now is calling on your advice when you're still fairly young?
Right. That's interesting. So on the age thing, I definitely always felt young when we started Intermix, and I'd say until 2002, 2003, until unfortunately I started getting older. I'm 34 today, so at like 31, 32, once you're in your 30s, there's lots of people in their 30s, so the young thing was no longer kind of an issue at all. The interesting thing was the transformation since leaving News Corp and joining this company, Add Knowledge, which was founded by a young guy who's today 27, and I sort of went in as the older, sort of experienced guy who's been there, done that. I went in, to run the company, to be the president. And the funny thing was, with this company then, we went out on the road and we raised $48 million from a group called Technology Crossover Ventures in Palo Alto. And on that fundraising trip, which took about a month, and we went to maybe 8 or 10 late stage venture capital firms, it was not only the first time I didn't feel young, the venture capital guys then looked at me as the old guy. So it had totally, in a period of just 3 or 4 years, had flipped. And, it was just kind of a funny experience to then be the old guy.
How did this News Corp thing come about? Did you just cold call Rupert Murdoch, or people were trying to put the deal together? What happened in that?
Yeah, so interesting story, and there's been tons written about it. But in reality, what happened was Rupert Murdoch woke up in sort of December of 2004. The legend goes, and this I've just heard, that he was actually sick for a week or something with the flu. And he's not the type of guy that gets sick very often. So he was home with the flu, and wasn't as mobile as he usually is, and consequently was online much more. And he's a smart guy. He had seen, like all the major media companies, television revenues coming down, newspaper revenues. Remember, News Corp has a huge newspaper. It's where they get the lion's share of their revenues from the newspaper business, and even the movie business and radio also coming down. So he had seen it for a couple years, but it was really taking that week off and being forced to spend a lot of time online that he really realized, wow, I can see why today's youth watches TV for 25 minutes a day and spends an hour and 25 minutes a day online. Before that, it just didn't really resonate with him personally. So he saw that, he came out of there and he met with his internet guys, it's probably as soon as he got back in the office, and he said, guys, we got to do something much more major than we're doing. What News Corp was doing, which most of the big media companies were doing at the time, was taking their offline brands like Fox Sports and then launching foxsports.com and putting up the content, much of the same content, and trying to sell ads behind it. He realized, he's a brilliant guy, and I got to fortunately spend a lot of time with him during the sale and after the sale. But he rightfully realized that wasn't going to make them a leader in this new media space, that he had to be much more aggressive. So consequently, he met with the group. They brought in an outside consulting firm, and he said, I'm willing to spend roughly $1.5 billion over the next couple years buying some of the assets that we need. Because anytime, I think News Corp has something like 40,000 employees, so there's a certain culture that has. It's not realistic to think that a 40,000 person old media company is just going to be able to launch new media websites and be super successful, and he realized that. So consequently, he said, I'm willing to spend $1.5 billion and jumpstart our process. The timing was sort of right. MySpace was growing rapidly through January through the summer of 2005. It got on News Corp's radar. It also got on Viacom's radar. Viacom started due diligence on Intermix. Remember, the one thing about being a public company is you're sort of for sale every day. People don't realize it, but our stock price was at 7 or 8, which was like a $400 million market cap. And anyone in the world can come buy the company, basically, for that. I mean, you have to make a deal with the company and the board of directors, but essentially a value is put on that company. So when these guys first started looking at the business, we, of course, welcomed them with open arms, and we said, okay, we'll start to meet, and we'll see if there's a fit and a cultural fit and if there's interest. So Viacom started the process. This is a long story, but I'll tell the short story, is they are more traditional in the sense that they do tons of due diligence and have the heads of every Viacom division. Viacom is MTV, Viacom is Nickelodeon, Viacom is obviously a massive company in its own right. So they would more bring in the heads of those divisions, have them involved. Is this MySpace asset something we need, or is it something we can build? So they're going through that process. Meanwhile, you've got Rupert Murdoch, who, it's common knowledge, really runs News Corp and has control over News Corp. And when he says, we're going to go up here and take a right, that company goes up there and takes a right. So that's really what happened, is News Corp got wind that the Viacom had started due diligence and had been a week or two into diligence. Murdoch said, I want to do a deal. What numbers are it going to take? This number came about of $12, which is roughly $700 million to the shareholders. The board voted on it and said, okay, and they crammed through due diligence literally in about a 3.5 day period, where we were all sort of in one office floor in Century City for that entire time, and just going through all the massive amounts of information that you need to go through both sides. And we got there and announced the deal on Monday morning. And the interesting thing is that people don't realize today, everybody talks today about what a great deal News Corp got and how it's transformed their company and their business, which it has. But at the time, if you go back and look at the press for the first 3 months after the deal was announced, everybody said the old man's lost it. Murdoch's finally shown that he's out of it. He just paid $700 million, mainly for a site called MySpace, which had only been around at that time 18 months. And there certainly has been lots of internet stories of businesses that were purchased for $600 million because they were growing like this, and 8 months later, they're not the cool place to be anymore, and they're literally worth $10 million. So it looked on the surface, to outsiders at least, like this could be one of those moves, but obviously for Murdoch and for us, really, the business has continued to grow, and News Corp has really done a great job at protecting the brand of MySpace and not putting their stamp on it. as well as really helping it grow internationally.
If you think about going IPO first and then making the sale to Murdoch second as two high points, what are the differences between those two that you felt?
Those are two high points. You're right about that. In between there, just for full disclosure to everybody, it was like a roller coaster. There was ups and downs that whole way. The initial high point of being public and seeing a stock trade and all that kind of stuff was an incredible feeling. It really was. That almost was more of an incredible feeling than selling the business, because I'd never imagined it almost, and I'd never felt that feeling of actually getting it off the ground. And it's kind of like an airplane taking off. Once you're actually public and trading, the sky is the limit. We did 25 acquisitions over 7 years, most of them with our public currency. So you can really quickly grow a business if that's what you want to do, as opposed to the sale, which I was ecstatic about also. But one, it came after those 3 straight days of being locked in a room doing due diligence. So we were honestly just so exhausted. As soon as it got announced, I went to sleep for like 4 or 5 hours and then went back into the office. But also I knew that we had built such an asset at that point, and there was value there, that either it was going to work out with News Corp, or it would work out with Viacom, or it would work out with Disney, or something would happen. So I'd say that's the difference.
How has the experience changed your life?
So it's certainly changed my life. One thing that I just think is interesting is now setting up meetings or trying to get people to call me back is a breeze. I mean, it's very funny, and not just from 1998, but I mean even from 2003 or 2004, where if I was going on a trip to New York and I wanted to meet with these 5 companies, I would send emails back then, and I might get 2 people to respond and 1 actual meeting set up. Today, if I send those 5 emails, all 5 people email back like 2 minutes later, and they're all magically available now. Lots of these people are just, now they want to meet all of a sudden, and now I can go spend an hour and a half with them, and they'll listen, and it just is funny to me because I'm the same person, and I think, I had a decent, whatever the reason I was calling them for in the first place back then, was hopefully a good idea, and the same thing now, but it's just now taken from the business community so much more differently because of the success of MySpace and because of that brand, that it's allowed so much more access and open doors that honestly I never imagined would be open.
Do they recognize the name?
In the internet space, certainly they recognize the name. The fun thing that happened in Los Angeles over the last couple years is not only the Intermix MySpace sale, but there were really 5 or 6 other businesses, Shopzilla, Price Grabber, Lower My Bills. All those companies were really built starting in '99 and coincidentally sold in that window for big numbers, 400 million, 500 million, 600 million, just like us. So consequently, there's a kind of this big internet group that has been in the space since the early '90s, and everyone knows everyone else. There's just not that many.
It's like the Cool Kids Club.
It's kind of, yeah. But what's interesting is it didn't used to be the Cool Kids Club. It used to be in 2002 and 2003 and 2001, it was almost the Uncool Kids Club. People were leaving internet businesses. I really remember hearing ads on the radio that would make fun of internet companies and say, things you can use internet stock for. One was like toilet paper, and one, it was that kind of stuff. It was like a big, national joke. Everyone remembers the dot-com crash, and literally, 2 years later, it's completely changed.
Going back to the talk about when you call people now and they'll meet with you, what's your thought on that? Because we're all young people, and we kind of have this feeling of just give me a chance. Like you said, I have something good to say. I have a good idea, but geez, I have to reach that success before you actually give me your time. So what's your advice to people out there?
Well, I think the first one is most people are too afraid or too shy to call the right decision maker in the first place. I mean, that's definitely the number one issue I see. Even today at Add Knowledge, the number one thing in dealing with salespeople or hiring new salespeople is pick up that phone and call that person directly. It's so much safer to say, oh, I'm going to email them some stuff, and if I hear back then, or I don't want to call them now, they might be at lunch, or let's give them time, it's a Monday to get through their stuff. None of that stuff actually means anything. It's like, start calling that person. I'm very aggressive when I'm calling someone. So for example, if the front receptionist or their receptionist says the person's on the line, I say, no problem, I'll hold. I'll wait. I'm happy to wait, because I can just put it on speaker and then be working on emails, and all of a sudden then that person, the assistant, says, whoa, this person's not going away. So I either gotta connect him with the person that he's looking for, or I gotta come up with some other excuse. So even just that kind of aggressiveness makes 80% of the battle. The other things are getting the idea across in a credible way and a consistent, easy to understand way is obviously key. Anytime clearly you can have any sort of mutual contact or mutual connection help you get in the door, I think all that should be leveraged to the max. I think in a way it's overvalued by people in general, but so what? People value it. I mean, if someone says, hey, this is a friend of Evan's and he wants to come to LA and talk about MySpace, it's like, I'll do it instantly, right? It has so much more credibility than someone emailing me out of nowhere saying, I want to meet with you and talk about MySpace. So really kind of understanding how that networking works and trying different things and not giving up obviously is the key.
So when you first got that first yes, we'll give you money, what were the dots that connected to that point? I mean, who did you have to go through? What were the milestones to get to that?
To that initial, the dots were 150 no's. I mean, that really was it.
Did you get an introduction to that person, or how did it go?
Yeah, so we got that bank worked in that world, that private placement world that I had talked about earlier. So consequently, they were sort of in that network. And the nice thing about raising capital is businesses like that, and all venture capital firms and all investment firms in general, their business is obviously investing capital. That's how they make a return on their capital. They don't really want it sitting in the bank. So consequently, they pretty much will meet with you. You can get into most doors if you have a business plan and if you have any kind of personal credibility. They'll meet with you, even if it's only having their front analyst meet with you for 5 minutes, because they're smart. They know that YouTube at one point couldn't get any funding, right? And that was only 18 months ago, and fast forward 18 months later and it sold for $1.8 billion. And these investment firms have realized they don't know everyone, and they don't need to only meet with the really top tier, CEO that's done it 5 times before and that team of 5 people. They're willing to meet the 2 guys that have never done it before. So it's not so much that part, but what it is, one, again, having the guts essentially to go in there and essentially be out of your element. For example, they're in New York, we're West Coast guys, they're all wearing $2,000 suits and ties, and it's like I have literally holes in the bottom of my shoes, but it's just saying, hey, we're just out here pitching an idea. The only thing they can do is say no.
What were your parents' feedback in regards to this process? Because you said it was 8 to 10 months of no's.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure it came from they could see it in your face and your body language, but you still want to exude confidence.
Definitely. So my parents were great and are still great and were super supportive. They have always sort of taken that role of they are rooting for me and they're hopeful and they're a worst case scenario, safety net. But for the most part, they would just say, you can do it, or if you feel like you can't do it and you need to go another direction and go get a regular job, then they're supportive in that too. One of the keys to me personally, and I think to lots of people coming out of the gate that want to start a business, is being able to really keep your personal expenses as absolutely low as possible, and then certainly the business expenses, once the business starts, as low as possible. The most common thing that I see is businesses getting a little bit of money, maybe a friends and family putting in some money, and ramping up to a pretty high fixed expense where they can only last 3 months, or they can only last 4 or 5 months. Whereas with me personally, and this gets back to my parents, what kind of allowed me to go that 8 or 10 months of not knowing was, even though I graduated from UCLA and had theoretically a decent background, I was living with my friends in a converted closet. So it was a 5-bedroom place with a closet, and I had a queen bed in that closet, and I paid the lowest rent in the whole group. I paid like $365 a month, and I had that, and then I had a closet full of pasta. I could literally eat pasta every night. It wouldn't slow me down. So my fixed expenses were so low that I could afford to go 18 months. If I insisted on having a fancy car and having my own apartment with a big ocean view or something, I could have only gone 3 or 4 months and the whole thing might not have ever happened.
So what were your friends that you're living with? What were their feelings on this that you were doing?
That's an interesting discussion. I'm actually getting married to Sky Reynolds from Punahou April 29th, and a bunch of those guys, three of the guys that I lived with back then, are all in my wedding. And the interesting thing is there was a couple of them that were a little skeptical, to put it lightly, and just always thought, why are you guys going, it's such a crazy route to be going. There's so many jobs, just get a regular job like the rest of us and move up through the ranks and that sort of stuff. One of them was much more like, you might as well go for it. But I guess the point of the story is now, obviously they say, holy mackerel, like, who would have known literally from a closet in Hermosa Beach that, all this stuff would have happened and the business would have ended up getting sold.
What were the hardest times that you had to go through in this whole business process?
Oh, I would say definitely that initial first, well, there were a bunch of hard times, but I'll just hit on a few of them. One was that initial 6 or 8 months of not knowing if the business was getting off the ground, living in a closet. It's no joke, the closet, there was a queen-size bed in there, so it wasn't too rough, but there was only room for a queen-size bed, if you know what I mean. So I'd literally slide the door open, go to sleep, it was very dark, and then I'd come out. So it was that window, and then the next window, interestingly enough, was about a year later. As the company was growing, we bought a CD distribution company, a company called CD Universe that was in Connecticut. And I physically moved from this support group and a bunch of UCLA friends that I lived with, all guys that were in my fraternity at UCLA. I moved from there and I moved to New Haven, Connecticut, to basically help manage and grow the business out there, because really most of our business was out there at the time. That for me was very tough. It was tough, one, because we still weren't really making any money. So I got basically a converted attic in New Haven, which is where Yale is, in one of those old Victorians. It happened to be in the summer, so it was 105 or 106 degrees up there, even at 11 at night when I went to sleep. So I basically had to go to sleep, lay down like this, and just put a fan on me. Then I'd drive to work, and our business was in Wallingford, Connecticut, in an industrial park. And I had no friends out there at all, basically, just trying to meet people at the company as we were trying to build the business, and then literally just getting to the point where I'd go walk down to like a bar or a pizza place in New Haven, and I'd be the guy that's sitting up at the bar and starts talking to the bartender, and then the other person comes and I start talking to him. I was just massively out of any support group and had no friends, and it was pretty rough. It wasn't a short amount of time. It was 6 or 10 months of that. Then the business started doing better. I had a couple of friends started at Harvard Business School in Boston, so I'd go up there on the weekends. I started going to New York on the weekends. I kind of came out of it, but there was a couple patches in there where I was just saying to myself, I know this is awesome. I know it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get a chance to grow an internet business, but is it really worth being out here by myself and being kind of lonely, frankly? But it turned out to be the case, and I did think it was a very important growing experience for me personally, because I had kind of been in that fraternity environment at UCLA and then moved into a house with 5 or 6 other guys. There was always someone to do something with, and then very quickly thereafter I'm walking down to a pizza place by myself every night. So I'd say that those were the two kind of roughest patches along the way.
Was there ever any point where you folks were running out of money?
Oh yeah. So our business, if you look at it, we almost ran out of money in the end of 2000. There were 2 or 3 points along the way, just to put it in perspective, where we would be maybe 50 or 60 employees at the time. We'd take the whole senior management team out of payroll, and not for a short period of time either, sometimes for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, because we just couldn't make payroll other times. There were other times where we literally couldn't make payroll on a company-wide basis for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. And that's a scary thing. The one thing that I like to talk about, and I believe it's why lots of those employees stuck with us all the way through the sale to Fox, and a lot of them ironically work at Fox today, is we were very open with everyone about the state of the business. Clearly, it wasn't from lack of effort, everyone was trying, but some of those other internet companies that were well-funded and ended up going bankrupt, I think one of the mistakes they made was the employees, literally when half the employees came in on a certain Tuesday and they said, you're all let go, they were shocked. And then the rest of the employees, 2 weeks later when the company folded, they were shocked. We were very transparent and consequently kept the loyalty of a lot of the employees for years and years and years.
When was it that you got involved with Biz World, Boys and Girls Club, and community things? Was that before you made money or after?
So I've always tried to do as much of that stuff as possible, which is not saying that I did a whole lot over the years, but I don't know if I mentioned it before, but my youngest sister's adopted from Korea. And for our family, it was a big deal because it really kind of opened my eyes. Where I grew up in Central California in a place called Turlock, you didn't really see a lot outside Turlock. We adopted a little girl from Korea. It kind of was a big eye-opening experience. So I tried along the way to always try and do as much outside helping of people as possible. The only thing I was really doing before BizWorld of any size was Big Brothers of Los Angeles. So I started doing that when I was 25, just out of college. All through this fundraising process, I was doing that. And then BizWorld was really about 2.5 years ago when economically things were going better, and I thought I could not only help an organization from a guidance perspective, but I could help them materially, economically as well. And I met Tim Draper, who's the founder of BizWorld, about 3 years ago. He's a very successful venture capitalist. And so meeting Tim and really seeing his idea behind it and why he wanted to do it, from the word go, I love kids and I love business. So for me, I said, let's pick something easy that you care about. It'll make it a lot easier to want to spend time there.
So what's the elevator pitch, 1 minute elevator pitch on BizWorld?
So the elevator pitch on BizWorld is most kids, this is really designed for 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Most kids in that age group, especially in inner city public school system, have no concept whatsoever of business. And by that I mean not only starting a business, but even just what business is. Just the concept that businesses are out to make money. They usually make some sort of product, either virtual or physical, and sell that product. That whole concept just isn't really in schools. And if you get into a situation where the kid doesn't really have a strong home support, where it's a lawyer and a vice president of some company, in those family environments, the kid usually gets some kind of business sense. But in lots of homes, there is no business sense. So consequently, when those kids are learning what a negative number is, all this kind of math stuff, it just doesn't mean anything to them. It's literally like learning Greek. So what BizWorld does is it brings relevance to why they're learning all that stuff. And what the program is specifically is 2 days in the classroom of splitting up into 5 or 6 person groups and creating a product, which is a bracelet, marketing that product, and then eventually selling that product. And then I think most importantly, having a tally and deciding which business ran themselves better than another business. And the great thing I like about BizWorld, and I give the credit to Tim, is he wanted to make it like real life. There's plenty of programs where everybody ties, and there's plenty of programs where everyone gets to have each kind of role. But in BizWorld, there's a president of the business, there's a vice president of marketing, there's a vice president of financing, there's a vice president of sales, etc. Everyone has a role, and if you want to try and be the president of that little group, you just got to convince the other 5 or 6 kids in your group. You may or you may not, but that's reality. And the other reality, of course, is some businesses are going to perform better than others, sell their bracelets for 80 biz bucks, and some of them aren't going to make a good bracelet and sell it for $8. But the kids all of a sudden are saying, wow, I built a business and our business was great, or our business didn't do very well, but it adds some context to the whole reason why they're learning. And I've taught the class a few times in San Francisco and in LA, and it's incredible when you see that impact on a 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th grader that just never thought of that concept before, never had that kind of perspective. When the light goes off like that, it really does change the way they view things.
Why did you start getting involved in nonprofits from the get-go? Did somebody share with you that it was important to give back, or was it just something within you that you wanted to get involved in?
I mean, I've seen my parents over the years do kind of what they can, where they can. So consequently, I just, and really most of my family as well. So I just always viewed it as soon as I could, I would spend the amount of time and energy and money that I could in any sort of arena. And again, just the match with BizWorld being kids and business made it too good to pass up.
Why was it important to you to still be involved with Big Brothers in Los Angeles when you're doing this fundraising process? Entrepreneurs are always busy.
Well, the one thing about Big Brothers of LA is you have a commitment to the kids, and I happen to have 2 guys that are brothers. And so consequently, once you're sort of hooked in there, it's not the kind of thing, which they definitely, fully disclose up front, but it's not the kind of thing you can do for 2 or 3 months and then not do, as opposed to lots of nonprofits where obviously you can. So that really made it so I needed to stay committed through that process.
And do you think that helped your business at all, or your psyche?
In the world of karma, maybe, or and certainly in the world of personally being happy with yourself and being, having some self-confidence and going out there and saying, it's not the end of the world if this guy says no, because I feel good about myself and I'm doing 5 or 6 other things, and this business thing is just one of them. That's why I think it really becomes a powerful thing, because it really rounds you out as a person and gives you that self-confidence. I don't think necessarily it helps you in business, and clearly that shouldn't be the motivation to do it, but as a byproduct, I think it does make you a more confident person.
What would you say to people to encourage them to get involved in giving back to the community and something that they're passionate about?
I mean, we just had the big Biz World fundraiser in San Francisco about 2 months ago, and we had about 300 corporate executives in there and a lot of people that gave a lot of money. But I got on stage and I said to the group, go teach a class. The money is great and we appreciate it, and it was a lot of money we were able to raise in a short amount of time, but the impact that you will have personally on yourself, you'll be blown away with, how that impacts you, and consequently then the people since then that have done that are all now much more active and much more giving essentially to the organization than people that hadn't taught a class, because then you're really seeing the product, you're really seeing how important it is out to all of a sudden change, even if it's just 2 or 3 kids out of a class of 25. If their little perspective changes and all of a sudden they say, I can start a business. I don't have to be X, Y, or Z just like my parent is. It's a pretty powerful thing, and the only way to really see it firsthand is obviously to teach the class. So I guess to answer your question specifically, the more hands-on, for me at least, the better. And I think it's easy to kind of be behind the scenes, and it's very easy to write a check and put it in the mail, and clearly organizations need that. But what organizations need a lot more, for the most part, is active people that really want to get hands-on involved.
Add Knowledge, can you tell us about that company?
So Add Knowledge is primarily an advertising technology company that's really built around the concept of making it really easy for advertisers to advertise across the internet. And by that I mean we've built a bid system, much like Yahoo and Google, where advertisers can bid for clicks or bid for visitors to their site, except we allow them to bid for visitors to their site coming from websites all over the place, from the email channel, from second-tier search engines. So essentially it allows small to medium-sized businesses, gives them a very easy way to advertise on the internet without having to hire an internal graphic artist, hire a media buyer, and go through all the pains that bigger internet companies would have.
One quick success story from Add Knowledge.
So Add Knowledge has had 25,000 businesses come into the bid system and bid for traffic and have traffic driven to their site in a very short amount of time, in just under 2.5 years. And we were able to go out, because we were growing so fast, we were able to fund that capital, as I mentioned earlier, fund the business with Technology Crossover Ventures, putting in $48 million and really validating the business model and allowing us to build out sales offices in San Francisco and New York and Los Angeles.
What's it like being engaged to someone else who runs their own business? Where do you guys find time?
That's a good question. The Sky's business is called Skyla, and it's a women's clothing store. It's open 7 days a week from 11 to 8. So the one thing, I've never really been part of a small business before or that size, but it's practically as hard as running a business with 350 employees, because it's open every day. You've got 4 or 5 employees. There's just the normal kind of issues of theft and of employee issues and that kind of stuff, and you actually obviously have to be there. That's obviously important to every small business. So between that and then my flying around the country schedule, it does make it tough. But the nice thing is Sky's store now has a big enough brand in LA and in Westwood specifically that she gets a decent amount of foot traffic just coming in to see the store.
What's the best advice that you've gotten, and whom did you get it from?
I think the best advice I've gotten probably goes back to the guy I worked for in college when I was a junior in college. His name's Ezat Jalad. And when he basically told me, don't be afraid, you call the decision maker that you're looking for, and you keep calling him, and if there's not a deal there to be had, there's not a deal there to be had, but don't let you thinking that you're not worthy or that you shouldn't do that stop you from doing that.
What would you say has been your greatest life accomplishment so far?
My greatest life accomplishment, I would say raising a family, except we don't have any kids. So I have to focus on business, although I hope when I'm sitting at this table 10 years from now, it won't be a business accomplishment. But so far I would certainly say building the business over 7.5 years and selling it to News Corp, and really going through that process with someone like Rupert Murdoch that previously I'd only read about, or Peter Chernin, and that whole kind of News Corp team was a pretty incredible experience.
So where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Spending a lot more time in Hawaii. I think we're going to spend basically the summers in Hawaii, and I see myself probably shifting gears business-wise and going more into the venture capital world, where I'm helping fund entrepreneurs and build their businesses, and it can be a little more of less of a day-to-day operator, which allows more time for family and to raise a family. But by that same token, it keeps me involved and doing something I love, which is helping grow businesses.
What would you say has been your greatest challenge so far, and then how have you overcome that?
By far, our greatest challenge growing Intermix was credibility and financing. That's the one thing that we continually ran into, is running out of financing and really running out of people that believe in us as the market shifted. But it's sort of that old saying, if it doesn't kill you, it only makes you stronger. So every time we were able to squeak out of it and live another month or live another quarter or get to another year, I always really celebrated it. The interesting thing about Intermix is our anniversaries, most company anniversaries just kind of come and go, but our company anniversary parties were more like, massive celebrations, because I was so thrilled that we had indeed made it another year, that we had indeed employed 60, 80, or 260 people for a whole nother year, and their families. So I'd say that would be it.
Would you consider yourself lucky?
Definitely. I think most successful people are lucky. I think in our case, we were extremely lucky. There were a bunch of things that happened as we were growing the business that we needed to happen. If they didn't happen, I probably wouldn't be here. Launching MySpace was more right place, right time with the right product. But I think in all those elements, there's a certain amount of luck that you just can't overlook. And quite frankly, I feel very fortunate to have been so lucky.
You're still young, but can you recall a favorite childhood memory?
Well, the first time I was able to beat my dad in golf, I was like 11 or 12. And my dad was like a good golfer, and I was a pretty bad golfer, but I was getting better and better. And I can just remember that feeling of like actually beating him was a pretty good memory. And actually, I'll say the most overwhelming childhood memory was definitely when we adopted my little sister, Lauren. When she came from Korea, she landed, it was during the '84 Olympics. She landed in LAX. My whole family went down to LA and were joined by the rest of my family. So there were like 30 of us at LAX. They brought her off the airplane. She was wearing like a little pink ski suit. She weighed like 9 pounds. And this little bundle, and the way they delivered her to us, it was pretty dramatic because, as a family almost, we were being delivered a baby, as opposed to most of the time, mom's having a baby and then there's the baby. So that was definitely what sticks most in my mind.
If there's one message today that you'd like our viewers and listeners to get, what would that be? I
would say business-wise, don't be afraid to switch gears. And if something's not working, don't kind of go down with that ship. It's amazing how fast you can develop a different business model or sell a different product. And I think one of the most common things that drives companies out of business is continuing to do the same thing, and they try to do it better, of course, but that's usually hard, especially if there's bigger forces at work. If there's a big market shift, you could be the best telegraph maker there is, but it doesn't matter. You're not going to be in business today. So it's sort of seeing where those big market shifts are coming and not trying to head into wind, but really trying and obviously have the wind at your back.
How about a life message?
I'll tell you, the older I get, certainly everyone says it, but the things that matter are family and your very close friends, and you really can't do too wrong if you just surround yourself with them and invest time in them and are honest with them. I think it's a pretty good formula for a happy, successful life.
Did you ever start a business when you were a child?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So my first business I started was a pencil company in 4th grade in Ms. Zollinger's class. And the business was very simple in that I would ride my bike in the afternoon to the other side of town and get kind of these higher end pencils. They were like swirly, or they'd have a big eraser or whatever. And where I sat in Ms. Zollinger's class was pretty perfect because I was kind of behind the piano. So I basically made it like a retail center. And during one of those breaks, it'd be like a 12-minute break, I'd pull out a box and I'd have 6 or 8 different kinds of pencils for sale that day. And business got pretty big, to the point literally where I hired 2 or 3 friends that were in other classes to also sell pencils. And that business went on for 3 or 4 months and got to the point that it was, I was maybe making $20 a week or something, but it seemed like a big number until the principal found out. and she came in and squashed the whole business in one day. But that was my first business, and I started a bunch of different businesses in high school along the way, but that was the first time I really saw how much money you could make if you offered a product. Everyone was happy. They were getting pencils, for 30 cents that they couldn't normally get, and I was buying them for 10 cents. So it really sort of opened my eyes to, heck, I can make a decent amount of money, and opened my eyes to essentially the concept of franchising or hiring people and really leveraging a single idea and being able to make 3 or 4 times as much money because I was then in different classrooms.
What inspired you to do that at such a young age?
Well, my parents, the allowance they gave me was never very big. It was like $2 a week or something. So I wanted to try and get some more money, and then I guess it was just kind of curiosity, and started selling a couple here and there and realized that there was a market there. But it's also a good lesson. You got to make sure what you're doing is technically legal, because when the principal was able to shut down my business in 10 minutes after a decent amount of time and energy, and I had a lot of inventory, but it worked out okay.
After a $703 million sale, why are you still working?
Well, I just mostly am working because there's still such exciting stuff going on in the internet space. And really, when I looked at leaving News Corp, I thought about not working, to be honest with you. But one, I wasn't married with kids, so I didn't have a whole lot of, you can only, play tennis and golf and go surfing so often. And two, I felt like what was going on in the internet space was so big, and is still so big, and it just happens to be the one thing I know well, that's not a good time to go sit on the sidelines. So I literally left News Corp on Friday and started at AdKnowledge on the following Monday. I didn't take a single day off just because of that exact reason. I felt like the opportunity out there right now was too good to sit on the sidelines.
How do you stay humble? Who keeps you grounded?
Sky, primarily, and my parents, and definitely I have 2 younger sisters who never cease to amaze me how many areas that they can poke fun at me. So that certainly helps, having that circle around me.
Does faith play any role in your life?
I was confirmed Catholic. I grew up Catholic. Sky's not really big on going to church, so I'd say I go to church for the big holidays kind of thing. But honestly, me personally, I pray almost every night, and even if it's very quick, and I'm just, feel pretty fortunate every single morning when I wake up that I woke up.
Can you tell us one story of how that faith took you through a hard period?
I'd say mostly that period that I spoke of earlier in Connecticut, which I was in Connecticut for a total of 19 months, but specifically 10 of those months were pretty rough. And I was lonely. I felt kind of lost personally, and there was just no one around for support. And consequently, I really thought through my own faith in not only higher beings and God specifically, but even my faith in myself. And that really kind of helped galvanize and materialize my game plan that I eventually executed on in later years.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brett.
Thank you.
If you resonate with Greater Good Radio, please join our community at www.greatergoodradio.com, where you can get access to exclusive content and offerings. Hope to see you soon.